What's going on, guys? It's Mr. Artist here, and this is a slideshow of my seasons 1 through 5 promo image editorials. I didn't grow up with this era when it aired on TV, but that's okay because I grew up with the various Thomas DVDs, and many of them contained classic Thomas episodes, and that I truly love. Now let's start the slideshow. Let's start off with our blue track star, Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas is my favorite character, as you know, more so because I can relate to him on a personal level. For example, we share the same name, we both love the color blue, Thomas is painted blue and blue is my favorite color, and also we're very alike in personality-wise. And he has an adorable face. Thomas's Season 1 persona reminds me of my younger self, as I was sometimes cheeky, impulsive, sometimes rude, sometimes sassy, and so on. But as I mentioned in my previous content, it's Thomas's cheeky characteristic that makes him lovable. That's what makes him adorable. That's what makes him likable. It's Thomas's cheeky persona and Thomas's playful persona. That's what makes him likable. Thomas is the most relatable character of the entire series on a personal level for me. This blue track star has changed my life in an incredible way, and I am forever grateful for the show's creator, Britt Allcroft. I love this Season 1 image of Thomas, as his shade of blue paint looks very splendid in it, and I love his smile in this image as well, even though it's not my favorite Thomas expression. You can tell that this image is photographed straight from a book just by the line in the middle of the image. Anyhow, Thomas the Tank Engine never ceases to amaze me. He amazes me to the fullest extent as possible. One way that Thomas truly amazes me is his ability to do multiple jobs. He can shunt freight cars and coaches, and he can pull them as well. He can pull freight trains and passenger trains alike. We all know that Thomas can pull Annie and Clarabelle on its branch line fluently, and we also know that he can shunt freight cars and coaches fluently. He can also pull goods trains fluently. Thomas is an engine with multiple abilities, and we all have multiple abilities, and we love showing them off. One of my abilities is making Thomas and Friends themed content, and I must say I am doing a splendid job at it. I love Thomas's shade of blue paint in this image as it looks very splendid. Oh, and if you pay close attention to this image, you'll see a lot of shaded and dark spots. I also love this image of Thomas pulling Annie and Clarabelle through the countryside. I love Thomas's shade of blue paint in this image as it also looks splendid, and as you can tell, I made this image a little brighter. And yet, here's another splendid image of Thomas pulling Annie and Clarabelle, but through the mountains instead. I just love Thomas's shade of blue paint in this image as it looks absolutely, positively splendid. Now here's an image of Thomas pulling the troublesome trucks from the episode Thomas and the Trucks, aka Trouble for Thomas. This isn't a bad episode, but it's not exactly one of my favorite episodes either. Now here's another image of Thomas pulling troublesome trucks from the same episode, Thomas and the Trucks. I love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint in this image as it looks very, very splendid. I have yet more images of Thomas from Season 1, and these are from the episode Thomas and the Breakdown Train. I love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint in this image and in the next image. His smile and his shade of blue paint is very adorable and very distinguishing. Distinguishing would describe his shade of blue paint. Adorable would describe his smile. I also love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint of this image. His smile is adorable and his shade of blue paint is very distinguishing and very splendid. I can't decide which is my favorite Thomas-centric episode of Season 1. It's a tie of this with Thomas and Bertie's Great Race and Thomas's Christmas Party. Weirdly enough, this episode is titled Thomas Saves the Day in the US version, and that happens to be the same title as the Season 8 episode, and I prefer to call it the UK title, Thomas and the Breakdown Train. Also, some images like this one are exclusively promo images. Now here are 3 images from the episode Thomas and the Conductor. I love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint in this image. His smile is adorable, and his shade of blue paint is very splendid. Despite all of his flaws, Thomas is still a very splendid, special, adorable, unique, and lovable engine. And there is nothing Thomas does that makes me love him less. Nothing at all. I am just like Thomas in several ways. For starters, we share the same name, we both love the color blue, and we're both cheeky sometimes, we're both impatient, and we both don't like wearing certain things, and so on. Thomas is a very relatable engine, and he's the most relatable character of the entire franchise. No question about that. Thomas is the basic embodiment of relatability for both children and adults. Thomas has always been and will always be my favorite character of the entire franchise. Nothing can change that at all. I've covered Thomas's spotlight, and now it's Edward's turn. Now here is Edward the Blue Engine, the father figure to almost all of the Sodor engines. I find it really hard to dislike Edward since he's a father figure to almost all of the Sodor engines, especially to Thomas, whom he's mostly a father figure to in Season 1. Edward and Thomas are like father and son, with Edward as the father and Thomas as the son. Edward's a good mentor to almost all of the other engines, although Gordon, Henry, and James don't always think so, because of their big egos. In the early seasons, namely Season 1, Edward was perfectly in character. He was very wise, and very kind, and very loving, very humble, and very fatherly, as that's what Edward is meant to be. I can't think of any Thomas fans who dislike Edward because of his fatherly characteristics. And honestly, Edward is really hard to dislike, as I said earlier. And this is the Edward we all know and love. Wintertime is snow much fun, but not the cold, and sometimes not the snow, because snow can cause trouble, and Thomas knows. We all know that Thomas doesn't like wearing his snowplow, and honestly, I can relate to him, as I didn't like wearing face masks at my high school graduation and at other occasions. I remember being forced to put my mask on at my high school graduation, and my friends did not have to do it, and that just absolutely irked me, so I can totally understand how Thomas is feeling. Plus, face masks feel very uncomfortable as they do a number on my ears. They're like really pulling on my ears, and my ears get strained. Well, that depends on the mask that I'm wearing. And that's why I don't like wearing face masks, because not only do they make me look silly, but also they feel uncomfortable. So yeah, I definitely understand where Thomas is coming from and how he's feeling. His feelings are so valid here. Next up, we got Thomas's character arc with Bertie the Bus, and boy is this gonna be a fun one. Even though this is Bertie's only speaking role this season, it doesn't matter because it's a very prominent one. I love Thomas's smiling expressions and his shades of blue paint in these images, and Bertie looks pretty splendid himself as well. Thomas and Bertie's rivalry is a fun one, because while it's a rivalry, it's a rather friendly rivalry, as they like to be competitive, but they're still friends. Once again, Thomas looks very splendid in these images because of his smile and his shade of blue paint. I noticed that in this image, Thomas looks a little blurry, but he's still clear. That means I can still see him clearly, as I know he's clearly there, but he's just a little blurred, as opposed to Bertie. I like this image of Thomas and Bertie better, as it's more clear, and you can clearly see both characters without any blur in this image. This image is also good, as there's no blur in this image, and I love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint in these images. Now we're on to the Christmas episode, Thomas's Christmas Party, which is my personal favorite episode of the season. It's my favorite episode of the season because it takes place during Christmas, for one, and two, Thomas is the main character in it, and three, Thomas does a good deed for Mrs. Kindly. I'm sure you've all been told that Christmas is a time for being kind to others and doing good for others, as I've learned that myself. These promo images are absolutely peak, and I mean peak because of how they're designed. I love seeing the main cast together for a photo shoot, and this is one of my favorite photos of the main cast. Thomas looks adorable in this image with his smile and his shade of blue paint, and Percy also looks adorable with his smile and his shade of green paint. Everyone looks very elegant in this photo shoot. This is another one of my favorite Thomas images, as it includes the main cast again, with everyone celebrating Christmas at Tidmouth Sheds. Even Annie and Clarabelle are there. Bertie is also there, but he's not in the picture. Everyone looks very elegant in this photo as well. I love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint, and I love Percy's smile and his shade of green paint. All of them look very, very elegant indeed. So here we are at Season 2, and I must say, this is an interesting season for Thomas. Thomas's promo images this season are very peak, and I just love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint in each and every one of them. Also, Thomas was very prickly this season with almost everyone. Not everyone, but almost everyone. But he was fine in the episode Thomas and Trevor, aka A New Friend for Thomas, which is this episode right here, because he's friendly to Trevor and he's supportive of him. As I mentioned previously, Thomas is the most relatable character to me, as I can sometimes be prickly, but other times I can be supportive to others. And, I just have a mix of personalities and characteristics just like Thomas himself, as many of us do. Now here is Edward, who I affectionately call Sodor's dad. I call Edward as Sodor's dad because he's a father figure and mentor to most of the Sodor engines. As you know from last season, he was mostly a mentor to Thomas and Percy, especially Thomas. This is the season where Edward really shone as a character. This season prominently focuses on Edward and his branch line. Edward is a very prominent character this season. Edward has quite some adventures this season. He gets the last laugh when Gordon and Henry tease him earlier for his predicament with cows, and he rescues James from being a runaway. He also helps Bertie. He has so many adventures this season. Mattel really undermined Edward's importance and prominence in the show, and they just got rid of him like garbage, and that is just absolutely not cool. But Mattel can't take away Edward from our hearts. We fans love Edward for who he is and what he does, and that's what truly matters. It all leads up to Edward's standout episode of the season, Edward's Exploit, where Edward once again tries to prove the big engines wrong, that he still has worth in him despite his age, and boy did he prove them wrong, by a long shot. Edward is just excellent in this episode. He is absolutely excellent in this episode, and that is the bottom line. The big engines were once again doubting Edward because of his age. They assume that just because he's old, he's automatically worthless. But Edward is not worthless, and we fans who love Edward know that he's not worthless. That will shut the mouths of the big engines. And if Thomas and Percy were in this episode, they would jump to Edward's defense, because I just know they would. That's what Thomas and Percy do for Edward. Now here is Percy, my little green track star, and even though he's small, he still has the biggest of adventures, and trust me, I know. Percy had the most spotlight episodes this season. He even had more lead roles than Thomas. Thomas and Percy are both very alike in personality. They're both cheeky, they're both easily irritated, and they're both mischievous. They're also alike in different ways, one of which is that they both have adorable faces. Both Thomas and Percy are adorable, adorable tank engines. They're both lovable and playful, and both of them are my favorite. On to the Season 3 section of the Thomas and Friends image editorials now. I love Thomas's shades of blue paint in these images. It's very distinguishing. Oh, and I also love this image of Thomas puffing through the countryside with Annie and Clarabelle. Oh, and this image of Thomas is just awesome. I love it, although it's a deleted scene, but I still love it. And I also love this scene of Thomas and Birdie, even though it's a deleted scene. Oh, and this scene of Thomas and Birdie at Farquhar, it is just superb. Now here are the images for my favorite Season 3 episode, Trust Thomas. I love this episode, and it's Thomas's best spotlight episode of the season because he goes out of his way to help a friend. Even though he gets into an accident, he's still willing to help a friend in need. Hence the episode of the title, Trust Thomas, because you can trust Thomas to help you. Thomas was true to his word in this episode. Oh, and by the way, I love his smile and his shade of blue paint in this image. And I also love his smile and his shade of blue paint in this image. This is my favorite promo image of Thomas from the episode. Now we got Edward, aka Sodor's dad. I just love Edward for who he is. He's a kind and wise and fatherly engine, who's a father figure to almost all of the Sodor engines, especially to Thomas. Edward is also a very good friend to Trevor, and I'll never forget when he saved the traction engine from scrap. Although Thomas and Edward's friendship isn't as touched upon as much in the classic series, that's not to say it's not there, because it is there. I love Edward's smile and his shade of blue paint in this image, and I can say the same for the next two images. You know, this episode, Edward, Trevor, and the Really Useful Party, was Edward's only spotlight episode this season. But that's okay, because sometimes a character just needs one spotlight episode a season. Now here is Percy, my favorite little green engine with an adorable face. Percy had the most lead roles this season as well as last season. The best episode of his from this season is Percy's Promise, in which Percy braves a flood to get the passengers home. Also, this is the season Thomas and Percy become best friends, because in last season, Thomas and Percy were work colleagues that were sometimes friendly, but sometimes at each other's throats. But this year, they're best friends. Like Thomas, Percy is also cheeky and playful, and of course, like Thomas, he's adorable. But we're not done with Season 3 yet. There's only one more aspect I'd like to touch upon, and that is the mail train. The mail train was first introduced in Season 3, and it's often pulled by Thomas and Percy, and later only Percy. Thomas looks really splendid in this image. I love his shade of blue paint. It is very distinguishing, and his smile is just as brightening. And speaking of mail, it's an interesting concept because when you get something in the mail, you either get excited or disappointed or nervous, depending on what the content inside is. But if it's a toy you like, such as a toy of Thomas or Percy, then I would be ecstatic. And speaking of toys, I'm thinking of making a collection of Thomas toys, but mostly of toys of Thomas and Percy. Toy Thomases and Toy Percys is what I mean. If there were a mail train coming to my house, I would trust Thomas and Percy to deliver the packages all safely, and I doubt that they will ever be careless with the mail. Now we're on to Season 4. I don't have a lot of Season 4 images of Thomas and Percy, but I do have some. I love how scenic Season 4 is in terms of the sets and the background and the foreground. And I love the various promo images of Thomas and Percy, such as this one right here. Now we're on to one of my two favorite episodes of Season 4, Thomas Meets the Queen. And I love Thomas' smile and his shade of blue paint in this image. And speaking of this episode, I wish this were the Season 1 finale instead of it being placed in Season 4, as it would be better in terms of continuity. But I still like the episode regardless. This image of Thomas talking to the Queen is my favorite of the three, because Thomas's smile is adorable and his shade of blue paint is distinguishing. Now we're on to my other favorite episode of Season 4, Thomas and the Special Letter, and I love this image of the engines. Thomas and Percy stand out to me the most. I also love this image of the engines lined up to go to the big city, aka London. And I gotta say, I love Thomas's smile and his shade of blue paint in this image as well. This image of Thomas and Percy in the big shed is my favorite out of the three, because both tank engines look very splendid and very adorable in this image. Welcome to Season 5, which I call the crazy season of the classic Thomas era. Thomas and Percy both look splendid in this image. While some episodes are lighthearted and endearing, other episodes are action-packed, and other episodes are eerie and intense. And that's just what I love about the classic Thomas series. It plays with tone. There's really not much to say about these promo images other than that they're splendid and they're peak. And, you know, the Unlucky Tug describes Season 5 as peak. My favorite episode from this season is Thomas, Percy, and Old Slow Coach, because not only are Thomas and Percy my favorite characters in the spotlight, but they're heroes in this episode because they save a sweet passenger coach from a terrible, terrible fate. It's like Thomas says in Magic Railroad, little engines can do big things, and little engines have done big things, such as in this episode right here. Now we're on to my other favorite engine, Percy. Percy had the most lead roles this season out of all engines, and his episodes are great. My favorite episode of his is Put Upon Percy, where the little green engine overcomes a landslide. I also love this image of Thomas and Percy, which is from the said episode. Percy's other episodes this season are rather lighthearted, such as the episode Ba, which I like to call Best Dressed Station, and in that episode, Percy helps with the Best Dressed Station competition. I just love Percy's smile and his shade of green paint in these images. It's very adorable and distinguishing. Percy's smile is adorable, and his green paint in these image editorials that I made is very distinguishing. My other favorite Percy episode of this season is Happy Ever After, which I like to call Percy and the Special Present. It's so lighthearted and it is so endearing. So there you have it, guys. My seasons 1 through 5 Thomas and Friends image slideshow. I've said this before and I'm gonna say it again. Thomas and Percy are and will always be my favorite characters.